Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are coming at you with playoff defenses. So this is our Beat the Waiver Wire episode of of our show, right? And we are looking forward towards week 15, week 16, and week 17 for all of the defenses that you should be adding or that you could be adding. And right, you want to try and prep now so that you have these guys on your bench. I would definitely be cutting end of bench guys. Anybody that you're not starting, right? We talk about handcuffs routinely in here. If you've already got a handcuff or two on your team, I would still continue to trim down your bench and add these defenses at this point to your roster. This is the only time that we would suggest that owning two defenses is acceptable. Without further ado, let's get straight into the first team that we're looking at here. And that's the Baltimore Ravens. So they get the Giants in week 15 and they're on bye this week. So I just wanted to mention them because they're going to get dropped this week, right? As teams prepare to try and get into the playoffs this week, if they don't decide to hang on to them, they're going to drop. They're currently only 52% rostered. Their roster percentage has gone down from 75% earlier in the day today down to 52%. These guys, this unit is getting dropped. You want to make sure if it happens in your league and you are looking forward to week 15, say you already locked in a playoff spot, but you can't necessarily get to the bye week, or maybe it's not guaranteed you get to the bye week. This is the priority at defense, because in that first week, they are going to be in a smash spot against the Giants, who are either going to be rolling out Locke or DeVito. So make sure you go out and get them if they are available in your league. The second team that we would recommend for week 2 is the Denver Broncos. So similar to the Ravens, right? They're on bye this week as well. So their rostership percentage should decrease as well. They're at 66%, which is actually an increase from earlier today when they were 63%. So this is the defense that people seem to be targeting more than the Ravens. And that makes sense, right? They've been pretty good. They've had double digits the last 3 weeks in a row. They just had 2 pick sixes against Cleveland. So they've been very good. And so, I don't know that they're necessarily going to get cut because of how good of a defense they are. But if they do, they get Indianapolis in week 15, and that's a very good matchup. I personally am not as big of a fan of them for the rest of the playoffs because they get the Chargers and the Bengals. Those two teams are going to be able to score. Those two teams don't necessarily have as big of problems against top-end defenses. So, for me, if you're looking at the Broncos, that's a week 15 solution, not necessarily beyond. Going down to the next team here is the Cardinals. So I think that the Cardinals are being slept on in a major way in terms of a defensive unit. They've just been very good over the last month plus. They have 4 straight games of double-digit points. They play Seattle this week. So maybe, their projection isn't going to be super high, or maybe teams aren't necessarily prepping for the playoffs with the Cardinals in mind. But if you need a win in week 14 and you possibly can get into the playoffs, or you're already in a playoff position and you don't necessarily need to win this week to make the playoffs, I would be adding the Cardinals now and just playing them. If you only have one spot that you want to designate to the defense, this is the team that I'd be looking to add. They get New England in week 15. They get Carolina in week 16. You can play them both weeks, try and help get you to a championship game in week 17 where you can figure out the defense at that point. And so this is probably my favorite defense to add if you're looking for 15 and 16 combination. So for week 15, the Cardinals are very good, and they also have projectability forward. We'll talk about them for the week 16 as well. But going up against New England, right? Drake May has been good, but the New England offense overall just has not been super great. I think that the Cardinals have been playing very good football and that they should be able to hold down Drake May and that offense overall. The last team we're going to recommend here is only 10% owned, right? So this is the team that everybody should be able to go out and get. If you're listening to this and you heard those first 3 teams and you're like, dude, I'm in a competitive league. Like, come on, those teams are all owned. Like, that's not helping me. This is the team that's for you, and that's the Atlanta Falcons. So recommending the Falcons is always just like iffy at best. They are not the best defense. They have not been the greatest fantasy defense. You pull up their player card, and over the since week 4, right, it's been like 4, 6, 2, 6, 3, 1, 1. And it's just like, okay, how are you going to recommend the Falcons? They come out of their bye. They have 14 points against the Chargers, right? And then they get Minnesota this week. That's not a great matchup, but they get the Raiders in week 15. And so I do think with O'Connell, right, he showed out a little bit against the Kansas City Chiefs this past week. So maybe there is a little bit of momentum around them here. the Raiders, but I think that the Falcons are going to have a big projection. They look to be playing a little bit better out of their bye. I hope we see something good against Minnesota to add confidence to that Week 15 matchup. And if you're looking to get a defense, right, that's widely available, that's going to be good for you in the playoffs, I think that the Falcons are probably the number one streamer in terms of teams that are owned in less than 25% of leagues. So that's Week 15. What do you got? Or what do you got in response to any of that for Week 15?
Yeah, I think for the Ravens specifically, their MO all year has been they've been great against the run. They've been horrible against the pass. But I think against the Giants, like, okay, you stop Tyrone Tracy, they're going to bracket Malik Neighbors, and, he's banged up as well. So I think they're really going to focus on shutting them down. And I think Drew Lock is really going to struggle against them. With the Broncos, like, it's the same thing with, Jameis Winston, right? Anthony Richardson has more interceptions on the season than touchdowns. And we know that, AR is not going to put up the yards through the air. So I really like that spot. With the Cardinals, too, I think you really highlighted and drove home the point that they've been in double digits, fantasy point wise the last 4 weeks. And, I love Drake May. You and I both think he's has a good career ahead of him, but he's still thrown 8 picks to 11 touchdowns. And over the last 3 weeks, he's taken 11 sacks. And we know the Cardinals like to be aggressive up front. So I really like that matchup. And with the Falcons too, we'll see how fluky last week's, 14-point game, I believe it was, against the Chargers was. And just keep an eye on how Vegas plays against the Buccaneers this week. Like, if they come back down to earth against a much worse defense than the Kansas City Chiefs, then I do like that one. But if they continue to roll, then you're probably not going to be needed to start the Falcons.
Yeah. So, and the Falcons are obviously the worst defense of the bunch. So, we got to have a team on there that's going to have a decent projection, right? And that has good matchups, right? That's the team that's widely available that has the best matchup here in Week 15. Going down to Week 16 now. So we have another team up top that's widely owned, and that's the Detroit Lions. They're 69% owned currently. They already played this week, so you're not going to be able to go out when you listen to this video and get them immediately if you're listening to this before Week 15 or during the Week 14 prep. But if you're listening to this in the playoffs, right, and you're looking for Week 16 advice while we're going into Week 15, this is when they should be owned and they should be 100% rostered because they get Buffalo in Week 15. So the chance that they maybe get cut for one of these other teams that has a better matchup is pretty high, and they're still available in 31% of leagues. If they are available in your league, or if they do get cut going into Week 15, you need to add them because they get Chicago in Week 16. They just had 7 points against them, so not the best game ever, but Detroit's defense going into Chicago, the weather, we don't know what the weather's going to be yet, but it could be really cold. It could be a really low scoring game. It's outdoors. It's at Soldier Field. So I think that this is a good unit to invest in if you can get them going into Week 15 as preparation for Week 16 in your playoffs. The second team we're going to talk about here that we already mentioned for Week 15, so this is definitely a defense that you should be looking into, is the Cardinals. They get Carolina in Week 16. And obviously, Carolina's been playing a lot better. So it's kind of difficult to recommend them against Carolina when we can acknowledge that over the last 4 weeks since Bryce Young took back over, Carolina is a bottom 10 matchup in terms of playing defenses against them. It's honestly surprising. I don't know if they can keep it up. I don't necessarily think they will. And the Cardinals have a lot to play for. They're trying to win that division. I think that they could just take it to the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals could take it to Carolina, and Carolina's run defense still isn't that good. They got James Conner, they got Trey Benson, they got Kyler Murray. Like, that is not who you want to be facing when you have a bad run defense. And so I think that there's a chance here with the Cardinals that they could play ball control, that they're really going to try and keep the score down against the Panthers and try and limit their possessions. So I do expect them to have a good performance in Week 16 as well. The third team that we want to recommend here is the Chargers. So they're going up against Denver. And Denver has a very good defense. The Chargers have a very good defense. And I think, the Chargers at 34% rostered should be pretty widely available in your leagues. And they also have a great matchup looking forward into Week 17, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. But I think that the Chargers, even against Denver, Denver has looked pretty good overall as a unit, even on offense, right? Cortland Sutton's really coming into his own. Bo Nix has been a top 10 quarterback for over a month now at this point. And so, recommending against that good of a defense, maybe not such a good idea, but the Chargers have a really good secondary, and the Broncos can't run the ball at all. So it's kind of this thing where Denver's offense does not match up well against the Chargers defense. I think that the Chargers can rack up points here. I think that they could turn the ball over a couple times in this matchup. So I really like the Chargers in week 16 as well. And then another reason maybe to pick up the Falcons for that week 15 matchup that we talked about is then they turn around and get the Giants in week 16. Another just team that is not good. They're either going to get Drew Lock, they're either going to get, or Tommy DeVito, right? We mentioned that with the Ravens. And it's just difficult to beat that matchup, right? I mean, the Cardinals are not that good. The Falcons are not that good. I really wish that we were in a different situation in terms of which team got to play those two teams. Maybe a little bit better defense. And then we're looking at these guys are going to be in the top 5 or in the top 3 ranked defenses each of these weeks. But again, if you're struggling, you're in a deep league, you're in a league where teams are already starting to hoard defenses, this is the way that I would.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is pick up the Cardinals because this is really 2 good matchups in a row. And with Detroit, it was interesting because I think it was the Thanksgiving Day game where they played against the Bears. They completely shut them down in the first half. Caleb kind of came alive. That was the second week in a row we saw him kind of with a heroic comeback. So if they continue to play like they did in the first half of that game, that was really setting up for a big performance.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think really that's the key for them to win is obviously how good their defense is going to be, and could be a key for winning your semifinal matchup if you are able to secure them. So go and make sure you check your leagues for the Lions. Moving down into week 17 now. So we have 3 teams for you here. The first one is the Chargers going up against New England. So we mentioned same matchup, right? Don't mean to just continue to pick on the same matchup, but we mentioned in week 15 that the Cardinals were going against New England, and now we get the Chargers going against New England. And again, similar to Denver, they don't match up very well because they don't run the ball efficiently. They're leaning on Drake May, and the Chargers secondary is so good, and the pass rush is so good for the Chargers. It's just the matchups work out really well here, and that's why I'm excited about the Chargers. Maybe I'm a little bit too fired up on the Chargers because we just saw them get 18 against Atlanta. But I really do think they're going to continue to build up as they get healthier too. I just think going into the championship week, I really think that they should be playing their best football. They're going to be playing for playoff seeding as well, trying to secure a 5 seed. And so they're going to have a lot to play for. And I really think that they could get after New England in this game. The second team we want to recommend here, which again is not a very good defense, so that's why they're going to be owned in only 9% of leagues, is the Colts. So, they get the matchup against the Giants. We are picking on that matchup against the Giants because they are just the worst team in football right now. It's just very easy when you have a backup or a backup quarterback, right? You got a second stringer or a third stringer out there. Yeah. And Neighbors is banged up now too. So if they decide to kind of sit him going into week 14, we'll see what ends up happening with his injury. But he went for an MRI for a midweek injury. If they're not playing well or they're literally full tanking, they could decide to put him on IR. Again, that's something that we don't know at this point. But if that does happen, this is even a better matchup than we're talking about right now. So I just think the Colts I said 9, they're up to 12. So people are starting to add them, maybe looking forward to specifically the championship game. They're forecasting themselves to get there. But that Giants matchup is really good. And I do think, even though they're a bad defense, that they should be owned for that game. I think they probably are going to be a top 10 defense. And depending on how your league streams or how your league owns defenses, they could be a pivotal part of the championship game matchup. So be ready to look for them. I'm actually looking now. They're only 13th amongst fantasy defenses. So that's really not that bad either, right? They have kind of hung around, and in a good matchup, I think they could get up in the double-digit points. The last team we're going to talk about here is the Titans against the Jaguars. So the Titans have had a pretty good defense overall. I know you have them, so you're maybe more inclined to recommend them. They get Indy the week before too, so maybe you end up with the Titans there. They're 39% rostered, which is down from 49% this past week. So I think teams are starting to look maybe a week or two ahead, right, with defenses try and figure out who they want to play in that first matchup. They get Cincinnati in week 15, so you're obviously not playing them. I expect them to become very widely available going into week 15 prep. So if you are looking to week 16 and into week 17, ultimately with the Jaguars, I think that their roster percentage is going to continue to plummet. They should come available in your league. And this matchup against the Jaguars is one that's really hard to beat. Again, we just talked about second stringers with the Giants, and we got a second stringer here with the Jags going up against Mac Jones. So I just think, right, they are really good at stopping the run. They're not so good against the pass, especially since Snead has been out. But if Snead is healthy, playing in this game, that even elevates their ceiling that much more against a backup quarterback. Prevent the deep ball against Jacksonville, and they really have nothing else. They can't run the ball very well. They don't have anything over the middle, really, since Christian Kirk has been hurt. They throw it infinite number of times to Evan Engram for 10 yards a game. So, it's just a good setup for the Titans for that championship game. I think I would prefer to play the Colts against the Giants just because I think the Jags, they do get a couple deep balls. The Jags could show some life against a division opponent. I'm always weary of division opponents, but overall, not a bad defense here to look to if you're looking all the way out into week 17.
Yeah, I think with the Titans specifically, and one of the reasons that I'm excited about them and I'm playing them this week is they're playing Jacksonville in week 14. So we're going to get a good look of how those two match up. So if it's just they're not good and whatever, you just cut them. But if they do pick off Mac Jones a couple times, I think more importantly, look to how many times they sack him. I think this could be a really good matchup as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting too because they do have 8 sacks in their last 3 games. So they have been getting after the quarterback a little bit more.
Aggressive.
Minnesota, Houston, and Washington, right? Mm-hmm. Like those are good opponents, and they've sacked Darnold, Stroud, and Daniels a combined 8 times in their last 3. Right? They gave up a lot of points to Washington last week, but if they do get after the quarterback here a little bit, I can understand why you may be a little bit more excited about that. So and actually looking at it, they have 16 sacks in their last 6 games, so. They are aggressive, like you said. They get after it, so that does elevate your floor. If you're looking for a defense, that can actually, kind of secure some points with sacks. That's definitely a big part of where defensive points come from. So I'm actually like that. I hadn't looked at their sack numbers, and so I can get behind that maybe a little bit more if we see them get after Mac Jones a bunch in this coming weekend. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this helps you guys prep for your fantasy playoffs. We will be talking more about Beat the Waiver Wire and defenses throughout the rest of the season. So if you're here, we appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to talking to you in the next one.
Later.